Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our study of Second Kings. I apologize, this particular video was supposed to go up yesterday. And as a matter of fact, it did go up yesterday for a short period of time until it was brought to my attention and I realized that the sound technician didn't do his job yesterday. By the way, the sound technician is me. And so it has taken until today for me to be able to reset and re-record this video. And the reason for that is I do them on a day-to-day basis. I don't stockpile them for a few weeks or months before they go up on YouTube. And so I apologize for the lack of a day yesterday. But let's go through and look at some of the lessons from 2 Kings chapter 19. Here we have Hezekiah, and it is the continuation of the account from chapter 18. The Assyrians have come to the doorstep, so to speak, and they have given Hezekiah an ultimatum. Either you follow after us, either you submit to us, or we will destroy you the same way that we have destroyed all the other kingdoms. They tell Hezekiah that he should not be one who trusts in his God, because all of the other gods of all of the other cities and nations around them have fallen to them, even though their inhabitants trusted in them as well. I want you to notice Hezekiah's response here, and also the Lord's response to Hezekiah. When you come into chapter 19, the chapter begins with Hezekiah turning to the Lord. Immediately he goes to God. He doesn't try to figure out a way to handle it himself. He doesn't wait until they are in the dire straits of complete distress. But instead, he immediately turns to the Lord. He goes to the prophet Isaiah. He sends messengers to the prophet Isaiah. And as a matter of fact, in Isaiah, these particular events are also recorded. And so we have this two-sided situation where we see it from Hezekiah's viewpoint and we see it from Isaiah's viewpoint as well. But he sends messengers to Isaiah to tell him what it is that is going on, to tell him that they are not strong enough to be able to hold off on their own. And so it may be that the Lord hears the words which the Rabshakeh has said, Hezekiah tells him, and he might be one who will deliver us. And so he is going to immediately turn to God. He is not going to wait. And there is a great lesson there for us about when the problems are confronting us. You know, sometimes we have a tendency to try to do everything else first, and then if everything else fails, we go to God. Hezekiah flips that script, and instead he goes to God first, saves himself a lot of trouble and heartache in dealing with it, but also sets the tone for everything else that is going to come. Remember, Hezekiah is described in chapter 18 as being a king who did what was right after the style of David, after the form of David. That he wasn't just like the kings that went before him. He was one who strove to do what was right in every respect. And here we see a sense of his faith and of his trust in God. In the second place, in chapter 19, we see the statement of the Rabshakeh as he comes back once again, and of the Assyrian king's messengers. Because the Assyrian king basically says, don't let your God deceive you. He will talk about all of the other gods of all of the other regions and how they were foolish enough to trust in their gods and their gods let them down. This is not the other gods of the other nations, the idolatrous gods of the other nations, even though the Assyrians simply lump them in as being all one and the same, or all the type of the same thing. The Assyrian king is trying to distress Hezekiah. He says, don't put your trust in God. You know, there are many people today that are basically doing the same thing. They will tell us, in trying to get us to move away from God, that we need to not put our trust in God, because ultimately He will fail. He doesn't really exist. He's not really there. And He's just like all of the other gods of the world. But it just simply isn't true. And the time and Scripture and the proof of Scripture and the proof of life and everything else tells us that, shows us that, and proves to us that. And so while there will be those who will say that we should not put our trust in God, much the way they said it to Hezekiah, it isn't something that we take to heart. It isn't something that we follow after any more than what Hezekiah did. Because while others will try to convince us that it is vain and it is foolish to follow after God and to put our trust and our faith in Him, the evidence of life says differently. But then in the third place, as you come through 2 Kings chapter 19 and you come down to the end of the chapter, you have the sentiment of God delivering Judah. God does exactly what Hezekiah seeks for Him to do, and exactly what Hezekiah asks for Him to do. Isaiah is going to give this long response of God to Hezekiah. And then it's stated in verse 35 that it came to pass on a certain night the angel of the Lord went out and killed in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when the people arose early in the morning, there were the corpses all dead. God is going to deliver Judah without Hezekiah and his army having to lift a finger. And they will retreat once again back to their homeland, where Sennacherib is going to be killed by two of his own sons, and one of his other sons is going to be placed on the throne. So these are some of the things that I see in 2 Kings chapter 19. We see Hezekiah's faith in seeking out God's deliverance. We see the attempts of the Assyrian king to detract from Hezekiah's faith in God. But we also see God's deliverance and His proof, yet again, that He is faithful. So I hope that these things are beneficial to you. Next time, we'll come back and we'll begin looking at 2 Kings chapter 20. I hope you'll join us then. But until then, have a great day.